Any of the television networks' coverage of the Tuesday night election returns, you know about the Florida flip-flop.
What do we know about it, huh?
Yeah.
You know, first the race was too close to call, then Florida was given to Al Gore at one point, then later it was too close to call again, and then it was given to Bush, and then finally it was too close to call again. Well, here now is CNN's Maria Hinojosa, and she will explain why.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
7:50 p.m. on election night.
Florida goes for Al Gore.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida.
But some Florida Panhandle polls weren't even closed yet. And at 9:49 p.m., Governor Bush says the media is ahead of itself.
The networks called this thing awfully early, but the people actually counting the votes are coming up with a little different perspective.
The anchors were relying on judgment from their news organizations, which used data from Voter News Service, VNS, a consortium of ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, NBC, and Associated Press. VNS gathers and reports exit polls and real results, but this time, problems.
This was not a race that was called only on exit polls. At 7:50 p.m., when we made the call in Florida, we also had some tabulated vote. Actual votes, not a majority of the actual votes in the state, but some of them. And in one county, Duval County, the tabulated vote report was, again, too Democratic. It was wrong.
So at 9:54 p.m., Bush's doubts are confirmed.
Now we're pulling it back into the undecided column because some bad data came from certain precincts in Florida. Quite honestly, we now don't know.
It could be simple human error in entering the data. It could be some other kind of transcription problem, but it was wrong data.
Hours later, another shift.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States at 18 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Time.
Gore even phoned Bush to concede. But at 3:41 a.m., trouble again. Late South Florida votes trickling in for Gore.
The vice president has recalled the governor and retracted his...
I think the public already has a pretty low opinion of both the political process and of journalism. And I'm afraid that what has happened over the past 24 hours will not serve to improve the image of either profession.
An image media executives promised to improve.
We're going to learn from this mistake. We're going to find out what happened, and we're going to do everything in our power to prevent it from happening again.
Members of Voter News Service say they'll be meeting to discuss what went wrong on election night and will take a hard look at how they compile voter data in the future. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
All right, we've got more early edition in your future right now.
You bet. Florida voters are suing to have another election, but is that legal? Is it going to work? We're going to have a live guest to talk about that.
Also, we'll look at why everyone is so drawn into this drama. We'll have that and more as early edition continues right now.
Celebrating 2 decades of achievement, this is CNN.
All eyes on Florida, waiting for the numbers that may finally settle election 2000. But it's not a simple 1, 2, 3. Ballot confusion reigns.
Then there's the Nader factor. Any buyer's remorse?
My vote would not have been for Gore.
I think it's safe to say that Ralph Nader denied Al Gore a clean victory in Florida.
Plus, what people overseas make of America's democracy in action.
Al Gore. Al Gore. No, Bush. No, I think I would prefer I prefer it's Al Gore.
8 a.m. now on the East Coast, 5 a.m. on the West on Thursday, November 9th.
From the CNN Center in Atlanta, this is Early Edition. Good morning, I'm Carol Lynn.
I'm Leon Harris. We thank you for joining us this morning. We also want to welcome our international viewers who are watching us this morning on CNN International. Thank you for joining us. Let's move on and get right to our top story this morning. If you're just coming to terms with the day right now, there remain more questions than answers about the presidential election outcome, and one legal challenge has already been filed. National and even international attention is focusing on the resumption of the recount in Florida, which just began.
In fact, monitors are on hand from both the Democratic and Republican parties. The recount could wind up this afternoon, and more than 19,000 votes not counted in Palm Beach County. That is creating a storm of controversy. CNN's Bill Hemmer is our point person in Tallahassee this morning, covering all the developments overnight of the Florida recount.
That's right. Let's go to Bill now and get the specifics on the problems and the allegations that are swirling right now. Bill, morning to you once again. Why don't you start with the controversy in Palm Beach?
Indeed. Okay, Leon, Carol, good morning once again. As we mentioned last time we talked, the eyes of the country really focused right now on the state of Florida. In fact, the local newspaper here in the state capital, the Tallahassee Democrat, spells it out. The Bush lead narrows. Indeed, it did overnight. Narrowed slightly. Right now, 1,278, the margin of difference between the Texas governor and the Vice President Al Gore. The counting will continue today, but so too will the questions in certain parts of the state. Want to show you the controversy that developed about time yesterday on a ballot in Palm Beach County. It is said that a number of voters voting in that particular district were confused by what you see here, the highlighted portion indicating and suggesting possibly that a number of voters inside the polling booth were confused because of the configuration. It should be pointed out, however, according to state law here in Florida, that both officials from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party approve that ballot before indeed it goes before voters, as it did on Tuesday here in Florida. Having said that, you mentioned the surrogates. For the Gore campaign, no fewer than 75 people have flooded into Tallahassee and in different parts of Florida to oversee and supervise the recounting effort. Bill Daly is the campaign chairman for Al Gore, and we spoke with him last hour about what they are looking at right now here in the Sunshine State.
There's obvious evidence of confusion when you have 19,000 people whose ballots were discarded and who wanted to participate in the system. This vote is now down to 900 or less, spread between Governor Bush and the Vice President, but with 19,000 ballots in one county being discarded by virtue of obvious confusion, it raises a serious question.
But when you give the fact that state law requires both the Democratic officials and Republican officials to go ahead and approve that ballot before it goes through voters, where's the argument?
Well, the arguments obviously will be made in court. I'm not a Florida law expert, election law expert. We are meeting with lawyers. We're looking at the law, the supporters who are concerned as to whether or not a true count of the expression of the people of Florida has been made at this point.
Given that confusion, though, those votes, the 19,000 votes, have been thrown out. Many argue that's the equitable thing to do when there's a point of confusion. Would you accept that?
Yeah, but the confusion was caused by virtue of the layout of the ballot.
Indeed, but what else to do?
Well, I think the legal system will determine whether there are options. But we have to remember, over 100 million Americans participated in a system which is the heart of our democracy, and to allow one county by virtue of what may be a violation of the Florida law, at least obviously some confusion that has caused over 19,000 people's votes to be discarded, would be a rather terrible situation for one to accept the presidency.
Again, Bill Daly last hour live on CNN's Early Edition. Also last hour, the former Secretary of State, James Baker, also joined us. He's heading up the Bush campaign and their efforts to supervise the recount throughout the state of Florida. We talked with him about the irregularities out there from different corners here in Florida.
My reaction is that any voting jurisdiction, when ballots are properly or improperly marked, are going to throw those ballots out. When ballots show votes for more than one candidate for the same office, those votes are not going to be counted. My reaction is also that the real issue here ought to be, with respect to this recount, ought to be whether or not the voting authorities of Florida adequately and properly pursued the law of Florida in conducting this election. And that's really why we're here. We are here, the Bush campaign and the Gore campaign is here to make certain, I think, that we understand this is a legal exercise now and not a political exercise, that we conduct ourselves in an atmosphere of calm, as expeditiously as possible. Vice President Gore himself used that term yesterday. In full accordance with the law of Florida and as openly and transparently as possible. And both campaigns have the right at every stage of these proceedings to have their representatives present. So, and I haven't heard any allegations of fraud or that sort of thing. I've heard some suggestions that a ballot was confusing, a ballot that a Democratic, elected Democrat election supervisor approved, a ballot that the form of which had been used in prior elections. So I think we need to back off here a little bit in terms of threatening lawsuits, filing lawsuits, and hurling charges.
Again, James Baker, last hour live here on CNN. But again, it is after 8 a.m. Eastern time, and based on our understanding, the votes from different counties that are still outstanding should be coming in shortly here to the state capitol building in Tallahassee. With us also, CNN's Mike Betcher. Mike, I want to turn it over to you right now. And clearly, there is an enormous microscope right now here in the state of Florida. Have officials talked about that pressure and that attention thus far yet?
Oh, yes, they have. They know they're under that microscope, and this may be the most analyzed election in the history of the United States. And they are concerned that a picture is being painted of the Florida election like some third world country, and Jimmy Carter has to come in and be an election observer. That's what one local told me. Their elections, they say, are like everybody else's. They try to run them as fair as they can. It's election fraud is a felony in this state, and but this is going to be analyzed. Elections are not perfect things, and they know that. And so they are taking great pains here. That's why they are allowing the counties up till, we're told yesterday there were conflicting times, 5 p.m. or 7 p.m., but I believe until 7 p.m. to count. Now, up there in the office about 10 minutes ago, they opened, and what they're doing basically is adding the numbers. They're not looking at irregularities. They're taking the numbers sent to them by the counties in the recount. Now, we're told one county has to recount their recount. That's Pinellas County in Florida. But this process should be completed by around midday, although they have until 7 p.m. tonight. And up there in that office are mountains of faxes from various counties around Florida. They will start tabulating those, put them on their websites, and the State of Florida Division of Election website, and also we'll be handing them to us, and we'll get them to you as fast as we can, Bill, but it should be very interesting.
And indeed, the outstanding issue still is certification, which is said to maybe take several days, and also the overseas ballots for military personnel from the state of Florida who call Florida home. But we shall see. But right now, again, the headline, Bush lead narrows, 1,278 is the difference. We'll see if...
Same headline from yesterday, too.
There you go. Well, we're going to work on that in just a bit here. But again, it could change one way or the other, and certainly we have no idea of knowing, but we'll be here to follow it. Mike Betcher, Bill Hemmer, live in Tallahassee. Let's go back to Carol and Leon now at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
All right, thanks, Bill. We'll see you in just a bit. Now, while Al Gore's army of legal experts is in Florida overseeing the recount, the candidate remains in Nashville. CNN's Jonathan Karl is there, too. John, Bush is already thinking about who will be serving on his cabinet. Is the Gore campaign making similar plans for presidency?
Oh, look, a very different approach here in Nashville, and this has been a different approach for some time. There's no talk of a transition team, no public talk of who would be Secretary of State, who would be Chief of Staff, the kind of stuff you're hearing out of Austin. The Gore team here is very much focused on Florida. They're saying there are two possibilities down there with their legal team down there. One is looking into possible legal challenges to these voter irregularities. Another possibility is demanding a recount by hand, much more extensive than this recanvassing we're seeing now in Florida. A recount by hand could take several days. But in the meantime, the vice president himself is out here, came out yesterday afternoon, sought to reassure the country that he's looking to end this process quickly and fairly.
Let me make my own resolve clear. No matter what the outcome, America will make the transition to a new administration with dignity, with full respect for the freely expressed will of the people, and with pride in the democracy we are privileged to share. And I want all Americans, indeed the whole world, to be absolutely assured of that.
The vice president and his team also wants all Americans to realize that if you look at a nationwide vote count here, it looks like Vice President Gore won the popular vote, that more Americans voted for Vice President Gore than George W. Bush. That's an important point because Vice President Gore's team here doesn't want to look like they're sore losers. They believe they won nationally, and they also believe when all is said and done, they won in Florida. Carol?
John, has the Gore campaign given you any indication of how far they might be willing to take a legal challenge, if they even decide to participate in a legal challenge at all?
Well, one thing that many of the top Gore people here are saying is that this is not going to be over today. They don't anticipate that when this recanvassing is done, that will be all that is said and done. They think it's going to go on for at least several more days, perhaps longer than that. They're not looking beyond that window. They are setting up a process in place here, including trying to raise some money eventually to get this entity, to get a transition entity in place. Not a transition to the presidency, but something to get him to the transition while this recount is taking place. But they want to get it done quickly, but they know that this may well be a matter of several days and perhaps several weeks.
All right. Thank you very much, John Carr, reporting live from Nashville. Leon?
Well, the tone is a bit different in the Bush camp. Let's go now to CNN's Gene Meserve, who's in Austin this morning. Gene?
Leon, the Bush campaign also wants to get this over quickly, their presumption being that when the recount is done, their man will have won Florida and won this election. With all the hints of legal challenges being dropped by the Gore camp, Bush Communications Director Karen Hughes issued a statement last night saying that when the recount is done, the Bush campaign expects the vice president will respect the will of the people of Florida. Former Secretary of State James Baker, who is overseeing the recount in Florida on behalf of the Bush campaign, said we have to back off threatening lawsuits and throwing charges, and he pointed out that thus far there have been no allegations of vote fraud, and if there have been ballot problems, well, those ballots were approved by Democratic as well as Republican election officials. Governor Bush spoke with reporters yesterday. He expressed supreme confidence in the outcome in remarks that sounded very much like an acceptance speech.
The strength of our American democracy was displayed in this exciting election. This was a close contest that produced a huge turnout. I want to thank all the supporters who worked hard on our behalf. I also want to thank the Vice President's supporters for their hard work and their belief in their cause. I want to assure them that should the election go the way that we think it will, that I will work hard to earn their confidence.
Already preliminary transition plans are being put into effect. Dick Cheney, running mate, will be put in charge of the transition team. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, who campaigned very actively with Mr. Bush, is expected to be part of the cabinet, and campaign sources say that Andrew Card, who was transportation secretary under the governor's father and who also was Bush's point man at the Republican National Convention, is likely to be named White House Chief of Staff. Leon?
All right. Thanks much. Gene Meserve reporting live this morning from Austin. Carol?
Believe it or not, Florida is not the only state where the presidential race remains undecided. The ballots are still being counted in Oregon, the only state with an all-mail-in ballot. With 93% of ballots counted, George W. Bush and Al Gore are locked in a virtual tie. But Bush has about 12,000 more votes. Oregon has only 7 electoral votes, and that would not be enough to push either candidate over the 270 electoral vote total needed to win.
All right, now turning out the nation's last unresolved Senate race, this one in Washington State. The race between incumbent Republican Slade Gorton and Democrat Maria Cantwell is still too close to call. Believe it or not, this morning, Gorton is clinging to a 3,000 vote lead, but there are about 500,000 absentee ballots that are still outstanding. Right now, the balance of power in the Senate looks like this. You see here the picture. The Democrats picked up 3 states, making it 50 Republicans and 49 Democrats for now. Now, in the House of Representatives, there are 2 races that are still undecided, believe it or not. One in New Jersey between Democratic incumbent Rush Holt and Republican Dick Zimmer. The other one is in Florida between Republican Congressman Clay Shaw and Democrat Elaine Bloom. Here's how the numbers stack up in the House. Other than the 2 undecided seats, Republicans will retain control. They have 220 seats to 211 for the Democrats. There are 2 independents, 1 aligned with each party.
Well, the U.S. election rocked Wall Street, and I don't mean in a good way.
That's right. It's going to check how things are going to shape up for the day. Christine Roman standing by in New York. Christine?
Hi, Christine.
Good morning, Carol and Leon. Well, investors do not take kindly to unresolved issues, and talk of the presidential election is dominating Wall Street. Stock index futures are trading higher, suggesting the day could begin with some gains, but investor attention will also focus on the economy. In just a few minutes, the producer price index is expected to show inflation at the wholesale level in October remained in check. Analysts expect a slight increase in both the overall index and the core rate, which strips out volatile food and energy prices. Investor jitters about political uncertainty, along with worries about high-tech earnings, hurt stocks yesterday. The Dow Industrials lost 45 points, the NASDAQ Composite tumbled 184 points, and the Standard & Poor's 500 index fell 22. It could be a bit longer until the Federal Trade Commission votes on the merger between America Online and CNN's parent company, Time Warner. The Wall Street Journal reports the companies are still negotiating with regulators about merger concessions. The FTC is holding a closed meeting this afternoon when many thought a vote on the deal would take place. The Journal also says some FTC officials are preparing to go to court to block the deal if the negotiations fail. That's the latest from Wall Street. Now back to Carol and Leon in Atlanta.
All right, thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. We'll head back to Florida next to talk with a reporter who knows the Palm Beach community firsthand.
Then after all the drama, did the Green Party get its wish in Florida? The voters weigh in just ahead.
Go beyond the horizon with CNN Traveler magazine, keeping you in touch with your world. From the environmental to the political, from sports to the arts, the ultimate resource for the informed traveler. In the new issue of CNN Traveler, take a look way out east. Explore the new breed of super jumbos and discover the magic of Timbuktu. Broaden your world of travel with CNN Traveler magazine.
The miracle of our...
What do all these people have in common? Everybody who's anybody from any place on Earth talks to Larry King.
Now you got it.
Larry King Live, only on CNN.
Look who's been talking to Riz Khan.
Hello and welcome to Q&A.
The most interesting people from around the globe do Q&A with Riz Khan. And take your questions and comments by phone, fax, and email. Q&A with Riz Khan, only on CNN. Movies.
I am my father's daughter. I am not afraid of anything.
Music. Celebrities. Theater. What you see is what you get, and more. A world of entertainment just for you. Showbiz This Weekend, only on CNN.
Now, CNN offers more news and business programs for Europe in the morning, starting with CNN This Morning, presented by Bettina Luscher in Berlin and Juanita Phillips in London. Then World Business This Morning, presented by Becky Anderson, live from London, offers a first look at business news from the global marketplace. CNN This Morning on the hour and World Business This Morning on the half hour. Weekday mornings on CNN.
Over 20,000 stories and counting.
From Brazil, Shanghai.
More than 200 broadcasters from over 130 countries.
CNN
all brought to you by one newscast.
CNN World Report.
CNN World Report, where journalists around the globe report the news as they see it. A unique perspective on international news. CNN World Report with Ralph Wengi and Asiye Namdar.
Once again, back here live in Tallahassee, there were 6 million votes cast in the state of Florida, statewide on Tuesday, and it's possible the race for the White House could come down to just several thousand of those 6 million votes. As we continue to track the story live from the state capitol today, I want to talk more about this voting irregularity that's been charged from a number of different corners here in the state of Florida. In the county of Palm Beach County in southeastern Florida, I want to give you an idea that if you were a voter in that county and walked in the polling booth, we'll show you what the ballot would have looked like. Now, there is a question by chiefly Democrats in that part of the state that say this ballot was especially confusing and especially for older voters who may not have been able to discern the differences between the candidates on the left and the candidates on the right and the numbers they should have punched. If you look specifically, the difference between Pat Buchanan, highlighted now on the right, and Al Gore and Joe Lieberman, highlighted on the left, this is where officials think there could have been confusion. Given all that, there have been 19,000 votes thrown out in the county because voters have punched 2 different holes, making those votes illegal and thus thrown out in the race for the White House. Here in Florida, we are told that those votes were thrown out before the votes were tallied on Tuesday. As this continues to swirl around southeastern Florida, I want to bring in George Bennett now with the Palm Beach Post. He's in West Palm with us this morning. George, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Take this story one step further for us right now. Today, the follow-up, what's happening there in your part of the state?
Everybody's expecting another lawsuit to be filed today. There was one filed yesterday by some voters challenging the election, asking for a whole new presidential election in Palm Beach County because of confusion about the ballots. And there's expected to be at least one more lawsuit filed today.
There is talk anyway of a number of people in your county also going door to door, getting people to sign a petition that would cast their opinion that they disagree with how the vote was carried out. What is the update on that petition signing, and what does the petition actually say? Have you seen it?
I haven't seen a petition, although I know that a local Al Gore, a vice chairman of his state campaign, said he had already collected hundreds of signed statements from people who felt they were confused, and based on the number of calls they've gotten, they said they can probably produce in the thousands more. I guess the legal question is going to be whether all that rises to the level where a judge would be persuaded to take the extraordinary step of throwing out an election.
Unprecedented indeed, as well as extraordinary, as you described there. As we go throughout the day today, do you know if your county has recounted officially and sent its numbers back into Tallahassee yet?
Yeah, as of late last night, they had made a recount, and Gore had picked up a net gain of 600-some votes in Palm Beach County.
Okay, do you expect those numbers to change throughout the day, or is that officially where we stand right now? And does the state capitol have those numbers?
I don't know whether they've been officially transmitted to the state, but that's the final count, other than the outstanding overseas absentee ballots, which are counted in 10 days.
Okay, George Bennett with the Palm Beach Post by telephone there in West Palm. We'll continue to track that side of the story. In addition to this, there was another name on the ballot. The name was Ralph Nader. And according to our latest numbers, Nader picked up about 95,000 votes here in the state of Florida. Did that have an impact ultimately on the outcome of the race for the White House? Possibly. CNN's Brian Cabell with a look now from Gainesville, Florida, on that issue.
Drift down. Ralph Nader supporters in Florida aren't feeling the least bit remorseful about the election results. In fact, as they pull up political signs around Gainesville, they're feeling
proud. Proud to be a part of this. I think this will go down in history as an important event in elections, and it shows that your vote really does count.
Here in Alachua County, Nader drew more than 3,000 votes. That's 4% of the total. Statewide, he got almost 100,000 votes.
If you look at the numbers in Florida alone, I think it's safe to say that Ralph Nader denied Al Gore a clean victory in Florida.
Don't blame Nader, his supporters say. Blame your own candidate, Vice President Gore.
He did have all the advantages on his side. What he didn't have was a vision. He didn't energize people.
Further, they say, Nader voters aren't necessarily lukewarm Gore supporters.
My vote would not have been for Gore. No, and I think when you're voting for somebody or something, you vote for what you believe in.
Their impression, they say, is that Gore didn't have strong enough beliefs in helping the poor, in fighting big corporations, in saving the environment.
Despite his record as an environmentalist, he hasn't done anything. And I don't have any faith that he would do anything when he's the president himself, because he's taken money from the same people that both Clinton took it from and that the Republicans have taken it from.
Is George W. Bush further from them ideologically than Gore is? Marginally, they'll tell you, but not enough to make a difference. And a Bush presidency, some of them say, might be a healthy thing.
I believe things got to get worse before they get better. And having Bush in there, things are going to get worse. And so I welcome Bush in there.
He and other Nader supporters may have Bush for the next 4 years. A presidency they may have, inadvertently or not, helped bring about. As for the future, Nader supporters here hope to get more local candidates on the ballot 2 years from now. Then they'll work toward the next presidential election, when they hope to do more than just spoil the election for the Democrats. Brian Cabell, CNN, Gainesville, Florida.
I'm Elita Vasilova. You've been watching our domestic network's coverage of the United States presidential election. We will have international reaction to the vote just ahead, including the European view of a political system that inspires both amusement and confusion. Plus, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat arrives in Washington for peace talks, as an Israeli helicopter fires rockets at a van carrying Fatah leaders. We'll have live reports from both the White House and Jerusalem.
In Tune with Volvo, Saturday on CNN.
For the most comprehensive look at sports news from around the world, watch World Sport, weeknights on CNN.
Is this table four?
Because in Europe we're different, CNN.com Europe is different. It's CNN's world news, just seen from Europe.
The most interesting people from around the globe do Q&A with Riz Khan. Q&A with Riz Khan, only on CNN.
In this week's Art Club, an exclusive look at Sir Elton John's vast collection of modern photography as it goes on show for the very first time.
In Atlanta, Georgia, Elton John's apartment has grown from 2,000 square feet to nearly 20,000 to house his main passion, a world-class collection of modern photography. He's put hundreds of prints on show at the city's High Museum, and in an Art Club exclusive, we take a tour around the collection with Sir Elton.
Photography is really is my #1 passion. It's fantastic.
The show is a rich mix of the modern, contemporary and classic. This is photography as art, no simple snapshots here, and elevates the act of taking photographs to a new level. There's even a stylized recreation of Elton's home.
Join us for an Art Club exclusive in Atlanta with Elton John, Saturday on CNN.